Good morning. I would like to thank the mayor, the Arts Council of Greater Baton Rouge, the Louisiana Division of Arts, and my homegirl, Nancy Little, for inviting me to speak to you all today. My name is T. Lang. I am the daughter of Dr. Otha and Jeanette Lang. And yes, I am the founder, artistic director of T. Lang Dance, and the founder of House of T. Lang, formerly called the Movement Lab, ATL, our in-house company incubator for movement-based creative thought, entrepreneurship, and experimentation and community building in Atlanta, Georgia. Yes, I am also an associate professor of dance at Spelman College, an Ebony Tower, and a leading liberal arts institution. As part of my tenure at Spelman, I was the inaugural chair of Dance Performance and Choreography Department, which centers choreographic process through the lens of Black feminist theory, contemporary dance, and interdisciplinary collaboration. I tell you all of this because I want you to know a little bit about my background before we begin, but also because these details are directly tied to certain parts of my conversation today. The title of my keynote is Come Celebrate With Me, how T. Lang Dance is building a sustainable arts ecology in the Southeast through dance, technology, and innovation. The phrase, come celebrate with me, is taken from one of my favorite Lucille Clifton poems, Won't You Celebrate With Me? And we will, of course, start by taking time to read the full poem in just a moment, but as we read it, I'd like you to also be thinking about how it might relate to the idea of building a sustainable arts ecology, as mentioned in my subtitle for this speech. There's a well-known saying in many creative spaces that necessity is the mother of all invention. It's meant to put a positive spin on the lack of funding, resources, and institutional support that often comes with trying to get new ideas off the ground. Roadblocks that are usually worse for those of us in the South or from marginalized backgrounds. I firmly believe that innovation does come from the basic desire to fill a need, but it doesn't have to be torturous or demoralizing. What would it look like to not only find sustainment from our creative work, but also celebration? Let's see what Ms. Clifton has to say on the subject. Won't you celebrate with me what I've shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up. Here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. There are 5 key points that always stand out to me in this poem. The idea of shaping a kind of life, the rhetorical question, what did I see to be except myself? The statement, here on this bridge between. Another statement, my one hand holding tight my other hand. And the opening and closing invitations to celebrate with me. I'm going to spend just a few minutes going over what each of these ideas mean for T. Lang Dance and the House of T. Lang before opening the conversation to public questions and comments if we have any. So what does it mean to shape a kind of life in the arts? For my work with T. Lang Dance, it involves many of the details I mentioned in my opening. I'm a professor of dance. I founded the Dance Performance and Choreography Department at Spelman. I am the artistic director and choreographer of my own company. I operate a company-affiliated incubator space dedicated to the advancement of collaborative and interdisciplinary arts in a wider community. These are things that I typically mention in any bio, right? Whether that craft is tied to dance or music, visual arts, or something more interdisciplinary, there are all these ways that we try to fill our lives with substance of this thing we love. We buy magazine subscriptions to tie our field together. We follow the work of others we admire. We spend countless hours on social media observing the latest trends. We attend local exhibitions. We travel to summits like this one. Our work is our passion, and that passion often becomes a big part of our daily lives. In some ways, this first point might seem like a bit of a no-brainer, but there's a potential downside to building a creative life in the way I just described, and that is burnout. In Lucille Clifton's poem, though, I believe she gives us 2 small tips for how to avoid that burnout. She tells us that she has shaped a kind of life. A kind of life is not necessarily a perfect life, but she is still living. It's not every single item on our never-ending to-do list, but it's the most important things, the things that are going to keep us going for now. There's also this word, shaped. That's the first of several references to the art of sculpting throughout the poem. Later on, she says that she had no model, which combined with the phrase starshine and clay often makes people think of molding, modeling clay. For me, shaping wet clay brings thoughts of flexibility and pliancy and the slow muscle work that we in the dance world rely on for kinetic energy. It's what allows us to make sudden pivots, turns, lunges, and to drop it like it's hot without straining or injuring ourselves. Why is this important? Because in our creative business, we should always be striving for sustainability, especially in historically underfunded Southern arts region. It's important to take creative leaps toward expanding our sector, but not at the expense of long-term viability. That means leaning into the idea of flexibility and an imperfect perfection. One of the best ways to grant ourselves the grace while still being at the top of our game is to meditate on Miss Clifton's next question. What did I see to be except myself? She tells us that she had no model, but what if, for our purposes, we simply rejected the models we've been given and willingly decide to focus on ourselves? Southern art organizations are often told, whether indirectly or directly, that we need to be more like our counterparts in the Northeast or West. There's nothing wrong with learning from our contemporary artists, no matter where they're based, and at the same time, investing in our own latent talents is part of that muscle work that's going to allow us to mold and shape the most resilient version of any arts ecology we build. One way I've done this is by taking time to go back to many grant applications I've completed over the course of the year, focusing on the narrative questions that can be so tedious at times, and finding unique ways to get out of the box those questions often try to place us in, moving instead toward a more well-rounded and robust understanding of who it is that I say I am. For example, how do I bring value to my community? What are their unique gifts that I only can provide? What gifts does my community deliver to me? How can we exchange in a resource exchange to uplift each other? What gaps exist in my local arts sector that seem like a simple but unrecognized fix? How might I collaborate with other artists to fill those gaps ourselves? What would it require to build a local, regional, self-recurring system of support? These questions are more open-ended than what we may be used to, but they're still somewhat challenging. Their answers are what will set us on the path to writing better grant proposals, yes, but also being able to talk about our projects and institutions in such a way that we can solicit our own private donors and supporters directly in community. When we have the flexibility to bypass certain granting institutions altogether, that's true self-sufficiency. Now, that's easier said than done. We could all just source our funding through great conversations with each other. What would be the point of national and large-scale private granting firms? Clearly, we need both. That's where I think the first two questions on the list might be something we could pin down relatively quickly, but the others are necessarily going to require a little more strategic thought and long-term, maybe even 5 to 10-year planning. For Teeling Dance, we've long known that our value center lies with Black women's stories as told through interdisciplinary poetic movement landscapes. From the very start of my career, I had explored questions of historical inheritance, sexuality, representation, and relationships through choreographic research and performance. But when I founded the House of Teeling, formerly known as the Movement Lab, ATL, in 2019, figuring out how to leverage that experience toward the needs of a wider community and come up with funding model to sustain it added a new level of complexity, especially since COVID-19 pandemic began 1 year after the launch. Okay, so anyway, uncontrollable outside factors, both small scale and those of global stage, are the focus of my next point. Ms. Clifton uses the phrase, "here on this bridge between." Many people who've studied this poem highlight the beauty and symbolism in the words starshine and clay, but I like to take a step back and focus on the self-awareness and foresight required of this speaker to know exactly where she's positioned in the current moment. For our purposes, how much do we know about the bridge moments in our own purposes and our own process? Is our bridge wobbly or uneven? Would it be best for us to hunker down and wait for a better moment to try and cross the other side? Are there other people on the bridge with us? Can they be of some help in getting to the ultimate destination? Maybe they're going the same way and we can be carried forward in the flow of the momentum. On the other hand, what if everyone's traveling back to where we just came from? Might we have an upstream battle if our aspirations run counter to the dominant culture? Finally, has the bridge recently been reinforced? Is this maybe a great opportunity to make a run for it and potentially gain a big windfall for our efforts? Each of these questions are rooted in situational awareness to understand very clearly when Lucille Clifton says, "here on this bridge between." Where is here? When I founded the lab, now called House of Tea Lang, in 2019, here included a need for alternative presenting support at the small and medium-sized organization level. I had also noticed a rapid decrease in the number of opportunities for choreographers and performance artists to enter the field through traditional stage venues. It goes without saying that certain legacy performing institutions will remain influential in the field for years to come. But long term, the stage as a dominating proscenium for the presentation of premier works is a thing of the past. Digital and virtual presenting platforms are changing the field drastically. Because of this, I have also noticed a sharp increase in the number of independent artists working outside typical institutional hierarchies and instead using innovative technology mediums to foster connection on their own, a gap in our existing ecology. I became interested in using Tea Lang's dance nonprofit status to offer greater access and funding to those operating from the margins, while training my dancers and students and other emerging artists on how to introduce some of those same innovative techniques in augmented and virtual and extended reality into their own practice. Could this type of mutualistic exchange work? I decided to run an initial litmus test at the lab, a pilot in the rapidly gentrifying neighborhood in the southwest Atlanta near the college campus, where I could see the most potential on a daily basis. By 2020, however, while those initial realities had not changed, a new sense of here had emerged. That included mass budget cuts, a 68% increase in our rent, a forced relocation outside our target neighborhood, the year-long closure of our new space due to renovations, a fight to remain open and operating for a community we had only just begun to invest in. Our bridge was obviously near collapse. Thankfully, the House of Tea Lang not only managed to stay afloat, but we've now entered a third phase, where here, once again, means something new. Our financials have stabilized. A swell of land redevelopment and capital campaign projects are reoccurring all over the Southeast region. The renovation and facilities upgrade of our current venue is almost complete, thank God. And while many of our counterparts have understandably chosen to downsize, Tea Lang Dance is moving into an even larger space in the West Midtown Atlanta, surrounded by the new home of Museum of Contemporary Art, Georgia, and several other key stakeholders from our local arts economy. We've gotten our second wind and are only expanding our offerings to include a regranting program for small, mid-sized creative organizations, a paid graduate, postgraduate assistantship, a new training studio for high school and junior high students to prepare them for the liberal arts dance programs, a fiscal sponsorship program for independent Atlanta creatives, our multi-tiered Black Endurance Community Series program for performance research and scholarship, our Black Soul Codes program focusing on archiving Black ancestral movement using XR technology, and an incubation leadership lab to support interdisciplinary collaboration across disciplines for emerging artists, along with creating a new XR immersive cabaret. This section of our conversation here on this bridge is probably the longest and most in-depth part because I want you to know what's possible. You may not be interested in taking all of the steps that we have to become a granting institution, a fiscal sponsor, and a community-centered programming space. Maybe you're just concerned with how to keep your own operation for the next year, and that's okay too. These tips can work at any level. But I hope you'll keep this advice in the House of Tea Lang in the back of your mind as a resource for future endeavors. As we've seen here, can quickly change, and the roadmap to make similar pivots when the time is right, can always be useful. Another useful resource when navigating major organizational shifts is to know who you can depend on. Our next talking point is the phrase, "my one hand holding tight my other hand." This speaks to the many instances where our speaker has had to pick herself up without any help. It also brings to mind the mental picture of wringing one's hands in nervous anxiety. But for the sake of building a sustainable arts ecology, I don't know that this line has to be so solitary. I sometimes think of the phrase, "my right-hand woman or man," when reading this poem. Another alternative is my second pair of hands or eyes or ears. Who are those people who act as your second pair of hands when you're on the bridge, making major shifts in your practices, feeling overwhelmed by external factors, or otherwise wringing your hands in anxiety? A better question is, have you found those people yet? I have. Lyric Jackson, Constance Charisse, Dr. Michelle Haidt, Dr. Alexander Lockett, Robert Bronner, Ariana Allen, Lamia Dingle, Kenneth Green. Finding your tribe, as some people like to call it, is no easy task, but they do exist. They can be your institutional board members, professional mentors, or even certain coworkers, staff members, or one-off creative collaborators. However you choose to find these people, they're going to be a major source of support for you and your goals in the long term. Teeling Dance has been fortunate to have had a really exemplary board of directors since our founding in 2012, and especially through the addition of House of Teeling in 2019. Still, we occasionally go through new member recruitments periods to inject fresh perspectives into our mix. Our most recent board member drive made clear our funding goals, number of annual meetings, and individual responsibilities for each member. These are the kinds of people you want to surround yourself with at every stage. Those that are prepared to talk up your name in public and private rooms with potential donors, who don't disappear when it's time to have those difficult conversations about the budget or submit a late night application, and who are generally just as committed to the success of your creative projects as you are. Find those people. And finally, we've reached the second of Ms. Clifton's 2 invitations into celebration. And it's where I like to focus on the power of a broad-based community network to foster a strong arts ecology. For us in attendance to the summit today, our presence is proof that none of the challenges of our industry has killed our creative momentum thus far. They've all failed. And I, like Ms. Clifton, think that's worth celebrating together. I'm looking forward to meeting each of you, either today or before the conference is over, to exchange contact information and find out about each other's creative work, and even forge new connections for future collaborations or sponsorship opportunities. Let's build our best Southern arts ecology together. And on that note, I'll open up the floor for any questions before we turn things back over to our host. Thank you. Cool. Yeah.
So I'm completely just floored at hearing your journey across your major obstacles into thriving, especially over the last 3 years. So hats off to you. That's just
Thank you.
phenomenal and very inspiring. So maybe elaborate on one of the hardest ones to get across.
Getting up in the morning, right? And not falling into despair, the woe is me, you know, being absorbed, self-absorbed, feeling alone. and gathering the strength to convene and figure it out without the institutional support, without the money, and then figuring out how to find and locate money. So it started looking like, well, we're back to living room rehearsals, right? Like how we did when we first started Tea-Line Dance. Back to living room performances or garage performance, and it's a linen cloth type of experience in the garage, in the living room, and we still charge tickets, but it's still an immersive, intimate experience. We figured it out by not giving up. Yeah, yeah. Yes.
How are you navigating the negative political environment that's sort of engulfing the entire South?
How are we navigating the negative political for the arts or for everything?
Especially the arts.
Well, quite honestly, it's a distraction. And personally, I had to cut the cable off, had to stop watching the news. It's a distraction, and I refuse to be distracted by the fodder, where I have work that I need to do, and I have to prepare my students the future to not be distracted. I don't know if there's an answer for that, because there's always going to be negative and positive, when the pendulum swings. But my faith is strong, so I can't focus on distractions, on the political distractions. As we get older and we see the cycles continue, I think we kind of understand what the patterns are happening. So for me, I don't know for others, I on my focus with faith.
It's not easy.
It's not, and it's not popular. Uh-huh. Yes. Destined to continue the work, but expand what I've been doing there in the Southeast region, start there and see how that could pull a lens, a spotlight in the Southeast region to national. From there, how that will take global, small steps, but still being rooted intellectually, artistically, in Atlanta, Georgia, where our tagline is, not only we have two, South has something to say, and Atlanta influences everything. So soon, it will have this global reach. Yeah. Yes.
How would you diagnose the lack of institutional support for the arts in the Southeast United States, especially from major foundations like Ford, Wallace, Andrew W. Mellon, Doris Duke, etc.
How would I diagnose that? You're setting me up. Well, I would have to look at who's sitting in the administrative seats, right? And the boards of trustees to see how they're making decisions, how they're being influenced, and what the rationale of their decision making, and how. Yes, I would have to. I would have to see how I would have to analyze their thinking and start trying to connect the dots. Why do you ask that question?
I think you bring up the issues of lack of the broader field institutional support. You talk about the Southeast in particular. I feel like I've observed that as well, and that there's a lot of inroads that do exist from these institutions based in New York and on, but it never feels to me like they're exploring more avenues of connection. They've got like the 10 institutions that they're already tied to, and it's like, that's it.
Yeah.
We'll explore innovation in New York, thanks.
Yeah. So I would have to understand why those seats continue to be filled by the same. Help me understand that, and help me understand where we could bring in more folks from the South or underrepresented artists onto those inside those inner circles to influence and to disrupt. Yes.
That presupposes that they're interested in it. and that's a very dangerous assumption because the same people are always not at the table. And if the powers that be are not interested in having those people at the table, then you're hardly going to make any progress.
Correct. So then, how do we create our own table? How do we find our own private funders? How do we convince or make a proposal and show that there is an ROI to support what we're doing? How do we use not only our nonprofit but for-profit models to convince new collectors to support the arts? That it's not something that's a one-off, that it could be tangible collections like our visual arts and our music peers. How do we do that for and for theater? I'm thinking that specifically for dance, and perhaps maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm slipping myself into STEAM, into technology, so I find tangible evidence, tangible collections for that ROI. Have to be savvy. I have to read the room. Got to pay my dancers. And that's why my Black Soul Codes research lends itself into that world. We're creating XR avatars and worlds and games in the sense of artistic educational games and art that are tangible, eventually tangible collections like art, not NFTs, but something different. Will take time as a strategic plan for our board to figure out, but it's coming. Well, thank you. Oh, there's one more question. Do we have time or? Yeah. Okay. Yes, one more question. And yes.
So, as I'm hearing these last few comments and your answers to the last few questions, I was thinking about allyship and thinking about how art is intrinsically tied to social movements, and social movements typically only go so far without that allyship. What does meaningful allyship in the arts look like? Or what are the pitfalls that we should
I think I heard your question. What does allyship look like? What does a successful allyship look like? Is that
Yes, successful and meaningful allyship in the arts, besides just throwing money at.
well? Well, I don't need lip service. I need funding, right? I need you to speak well of me in rooms that I can't get into yet. I need advocacy, right? And I'm gonna need funding, support. That's, for me, that's successful allyship. Both. Thank you so much. But I'll see you after the room. Yeah. Thank you.